In a small town surrounded by dense forests, there stood an old motel named Forest Inn. This motel had been around for decades and was known for its cozy rooms and friendly staff. However, there was one room that guests always avoided, room 217. Years ago, a woman named Mrs. Parker had checked into room 217. She was traveling alone and looked troubled. The next morning, the housekeeper found her lifeless body in the bathtub. The police ruled it as a suicide, but the locals believed something more sinister was at play. Since then, strange things started happening in room 217. One stormy night, I arrived at the Forest Inn. I had been driving for hours and needed a place to rest. The only available room was room 217. Despite the receptionist's hesitation, I insisted on taking it. I was too tired to care about the rumors. As I settled into my room, I felt a sudden chill. The room was cold, even though the heater was on full blast. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination. After a quick shower, I crawled into bed, exhausted. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of faint whispering. I turned on the bedside lamp, but the room was empty. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the walls. My heart raced as I tried to locate the source. Suddenly, the bathroom door creaked open on its own. I gathered my courage and approached the bathroom. As I stepped inside, the temperature dropped even further. The mirror was fogged up, and when I wiped it clean, I saw a message written in the condensation: "Help me." I stumbled back, my mind racing. I decided to leave the room and spend the rest of the night in my car. As I packed my things, the whispers turned into agonizing screams. I bolted out of the room and never looked back. The next morning, I reported the incident to the motel staff. The receptionist, an elderly woman named Mary, nodded solemnly. She explained the history of room 217 and how guests had experienced similar paranormal activities. Mary told me that Mrs. Parker's spirit was believed to be trapped in the room, seeking help to move on. Determined to help her spirit find peace, I decided to investigate further. I found old newspaper articles about Mrs. Parker's death. It turned out that she had been fleeing an abusive husband and had checked into the motel to escape. Her husband had tracked her down and drowned her in the bathtub, making it look like a suicide. With this knowledge, I returned to the motel with a medium. The medium performed a cleansing ritual in room 217, asking Mrs. Parker to move towards the light. During the ritual, the temperature dropped again, and the whispers returned. The medium communicated with Mrs. Parker, assuring her that she was safe and her husband could no longer harm her. After what felt like an eternity, the room became warm, and the whispers ceased. The medium smiled and told me that Mrs. Parker's spirit had finally found peace. I thanked the medium and Mary for their help. Years later, room 217 was no longer avoided by guests. The haunting whispers and cold chills had disappeared. Forest Inn regained its reputation as a cozy and welcoming place, free from the shadows of its past. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks. In a sleepy rural town, there was a quaint little motel called Meadowview Inn. It was a family-run business owned by Mr. and Mrs. Harris. They were a kind, elderly couple who took pride in their hospitality. However, their peaceful life was shattered when a new manager, a man named Victor, arrived to help run the place. Victor was a tall, thin man with piercing blue eyes and a cold demeanor. From the moment he started working at the motel, strange things began to happen. Guests complained of nightmares, feeling watched, and seeing shadows moving in their rooms. One night, I checked into the motel. I was traveling for work and needed a place to stay. Victor greeted me at the front desk with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I felt an immediate sense of unease but dismissed it, thinking I was just tired. As I settled into my room, I noticed a heavy, oppressive feeling in the air. The room felt colder than it should have been, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. I tried to ignore the feeling and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my door. I got up to check but found the hallway empty. As I turned to go back to bed, I saw Victor standing at the end of the hallway, staring at me with a sinister grin. I quickly shut the door and locked it, my heart pounding. The next morning, I told Mrs. Harris about the incident. She looked worried and confided in me that she had also noticed strange behavior from Victor. He would often talk to himself and disappear for hours at a time. Mrs. Harris suspected that something was very wrong with him. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to investigate. I followed Victor one evening and saw him enter the basement of the motel. I waited for a while before sneaking in after him. The basement was dark and filled with old furniture and boxes. In the corner, I saw a strange altar with candles and symbols drawn on the walls. Victor was chanting in a language I didn't understand. Suddenly, he turned and saw me. His eyes glowed an unnatural blue, and he lunged at me. I screamed and ran back upstairs, locking myself in my room. The next day, I told Mrs. Harris everything I had seen. We decided to call a local priest, Father Thomas, to help. When he arrived, he performed an exorcism in the basement. As he chanted prayers, Victor appeared, his eyes glowing and his body convulsing. He screamed and thrashed, but Father Thomas continued, determined to expel the evil spirit. After a long and intense struggle, the spirit left Victor's body with a final, ear-piercing scream. Victor collapsed, unconscious but alive. When he woke up, he had no memory of the past few weeks. He was horrified to learn what had happened. With the spirit gone, the strange occurrences at Meadowview Inn ceased. Victor left the motel, unable to live with the memories of what he had done. The Harris couple resumed their peaceful life, and the motel once again became a safe and welcoming place for travelers. I drove through the rain, my eyes barely able to see the road ahead. I had been driving for hours and needed a place to rest. When I saw the old flickering neon sign that read Sunny Motel, I decided to stop. The motel looked abandoned. The paint was peeling and the windows were dark, but I was too tired to care. I parked my car and walked to the front desk. A bell rang when I opened the door. "Hello?" I called out. An old man appeared from the back room. His eyes were cold and empty. "Need a room?" he asked in a raspy voice. "Yes, please," I replied. I handed him some cash and he gave me a key. "Room 13, he said with a twisted smile. I felt a chill but brushed it off. I was just tired, I told myself. I took the key and walked to my room. The hallway was dimly lit and the floor creaked under my feet. I found room 13 and unlocked the door. The room was musty and cold. The wallpaper was peeling and the furniture was covered in dust. I shivered and closed the door behind me. I set my bag on the bed and decided to take a shower to warm up. As I undressed, I noticed strange marks on the bathroom mirror, like someone had written something and then wiped it away. I ignored it and stepped into the shower. The water was freezing at first, but soon it turned warm. I began to relax. Suddenly the lights flickered and the water turned ice cold. I gasped and quickly turned off the shower. I wrapped myself in a towel and looked in the mirror. This time, I saw words clearly written in the fog. "Get out." My heart pounded. I wiped the mirror, but the words remained. I ran to the door and tried to open it, but it was stuck. Panic set in. I banged on the door and screamed for help, but no one came. Then I heard a whisper. It was faint, but I could hear it. "Leave now before it's too late," the voice said. I turned and saw a shadow move across the room. I backed into the corner, shaking. The shadow grew larger, and I saw the figure of a woman with long dark hair and hollow eyes. "Who are you?" I cried. The woman didn't answer. She reached out her hand, and I felt a cold grip on my wrist. "You must leave," the woman whispered. The door suddenly burst open, and I ran out, not looking back. I ran down the hallway, my heart racing. I reached the front desk and saw the old man. "Help me! There's someone in my room!" I shouted. The old man looked at me with those cold, empty eyes. "I warned you," he said. "You shouldn't have come here." I ran outside, into the pouring rain. I jumped into my car and sped away, not stopping until I was miles down the road. I pulled over and tried to catch my breath. My hands were shaking. I looked back and saw the motel's neon sign in the distance. It was flickering, then went dark. I knew I would never forget what happened at the sunny motel. I never spoke of it again, but the memory haunted me forever.